I used to believe a housewarming was just a party, a ribbon on a new beginning, a tray of finger foods, a few polite laughs, people walking through rooms they don't own, saying things like, "Oh my goodness, the light in here," as if sunlight is a personal achievement. I used to believe that because I'd spent most of my life believing the best about ceremonies, birthdays, graduations, weddings, even funerals. I believed milestones were meant to stitch families closer. At 74, I don't believe that anymore. At 74, I know a celebration can also be camouflage, a glossy wrapper for a debt, a room full of smiles hiding a throat full of panic. I know because my daughter turned a housewarming into the sharpest knife she's ever slid between my ribs, and she did it with a grin so bright I almost thanked her for the wound. My name is Marjorie Hale. I'm the kind of grandmother people underestimate on purpose. White hair that curls softly at the ends, hands that look like they've been gentle all their lives until you notice the old calluses at the base of my fingers from decades of paper, pens, ledgers, and the quiet weight of other people's secrets. I spent 40 years as a financial counselor, the kind who sits across from you while your world wobbles and says, "Breathe, we'll make a plan." I've seen men in $1,000 suits cry like children when they finally admit they're drowning. I've seen women rebuild from ashes using nothing but discipline and a cheap notebook. And I raised my only child, Ivy, with that same discipline and that same tenderness, like two hands holding the same fragile thing. When my husband Dennis died, the house went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the walls were holding their breath. He'd been laughter and steadiness, the kind of man who never raised his voice, but could make you feel safe just by walking into the room. I learned how to live with the silence. I learned how to keep the days from folding in on me. I learned, most of all, how to keep my love from turning into desperation. I thought I'd taught Ivy that too. Ivy was 36 when she met Grant. She told me his last name like it was a password. "Grant Weatherby," she said, eyes shining. As if those syllables came with a gate code and a view. She didn't talk first about how he treated her, or what made her laugh, or whether he knew how to sit in quiet without needing to fill it with noise. She talked about his family's legacy and the kind of neighborhood he lived in and the kind of events he attended. Words like members only and private floated around her tongue like perfume. I should have heard the warning bell then. I did, if I'm honest. I heard it faintly at first, like a distant alarm in a building you don't work in anymore. But I told myself my daughter was just excited, that love makes people a little silly, that I was overthinking, like the old professional in me couldn't stop assessing risk. Then I met Grant's parents. They didn't greet me like a person. They greeted me like a category. His mother, Lucinda, looked at my modest necklace, my sensible shoes, my plain little handbag, and smiled the way people smile at a dent in their car door. His father shook my hand with 2 fingers and asked what Dennis did for a living, like a doctor checking a reflex. When I said my husband had run a small home improvement shop for years, the air changed, not dramatically, subtly, a shift in temperature, like the room decided I didn't deserve full warmth. I watched Ivy notice. I watched her cheeks flush. And I watched with a slow sinking in my chest as she tried to distance herself from me with posture alone. She stood straighter. She laughed louder. She talked faster. She used a different voice, one that sounded like she practiced it on the drive over. And I told myself again to be patient. She's nervous, Marjorie. She wants to impress. She'll settle into herself. But she didn't settle into herself. She climbed out of herself like a dress that didn't match her new shoes. By the time the engagement became official, the wedding plans began to grow teeth, not because weddings are evil, because this wedding wasn't about love. It was about proof. Proof that Ivy belonged in Grant's world. Proof that she could host elegance and spend money like it didn't matter. Proof that she wasn't small. And the part that still makes my mouth go dry when I think about it is this. She wanted that proof badly enough to spend my life. Dennis and I had saved carefully, not because we were wealthy, but because we were wise. We had a little land once, years ago, nothing fancy, just a quiet patch, with pines and a creek you could hear from the edge. Dennis used to say, "One day, Mare, we'll put a small cabin there and finally rest." And we sold that land when Ivy got accepted into a graduate program she swore would change her future. We sold our piece to buy her a door. That's what parents do when they believe their child will walk through and remember who handed them the key. So when Ivy called me, breathless, asking for just one more deposit, first for the venue, then the flowers, then a band that apparently had performed at a senator's anniversary, I swallowed my unease and transferred the money. Each time I told myself it's a gift, it's love, it's her big day. But gifts are supposed to be received with gratitude, not grabbed with entitlement. The first time I felt truly afraid wasn't when the costs rose. It was when Ivy stopped looking me in the eyes while she asked. That's when I knew my daughter's heart had started negotiating with her pride. And pride is a thief. Pride doesn't snatch your purse. Pride steals your humanity and tells you it was clutter anyway. The housewarming was Lucinda's idea. Grant and Ivy had bought a beautiful place, too beautiful, too soon, with rooms that looked like they'd been designed for photographs instead of living. Ivy told me they were hosting a small, intimate housewarming for Grant's family's circle. "It's important," she said. "It's not just a party, Mom. It's our entrance." Entrance. Like she'd been outside her whole life, and the door was finally opening. I was invited at first, technically. In the way you invite someone you hope won't show, then the uninvitation came 2 weeks before. I remember exactly where I was when Ivy called. I was at my kitchen sink, rinsing a mug, watching a thin stream of water curve into the drain. Ordinary moments are the ones life chooses to poison because they're easy to revisit. I can still feel the cool ceramic in my hands. "Mom," Ivy said, voice gentle, in the way people get when they're trying to soften a blow, "about the housewarming, I think it might be better if you don't come." I didn't speak at first. I waited, let her finish building the lie. "It's very formal," she said. "Grant's parents are inviting a lot of people. People who, it's their world, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." There it was, the sugar coating. "I won't feel uncomfortable," I said quietly. A pause, then her voice dropped, almost pleading. "Mom, please, it's not like that. I don't want it to be awkward. Lucinda is really particular, and you're not exactly, say it," I said. Silence again, longer this time. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick, like she was standing at the edge of something. "I don't want you to embarrass me," she whispered. The sentence didn't sound like anger. It sounded like a confession she'd been rehearsing. And that's what broke something in me. Not the cruelty alone, but the preparation. The way she'd practiced discarding me like it was a necessary step in her new life. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, an older woman, a soft face, a widow's eyes, the kind of mother people assume will apologize for existing. I turned off the faucet, and the part of me that had spent decades reading balance sheets, catching lies, and making hard decisions in quiet rooms finally sat up straight inside my chest. "All right," I said, calm, almost pleasant. "If you think that's best." Her relief hit the line like warm air. Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd understand. Understand. That word. Like she was asking me to empathize with her shame. We hung up, and I stood there for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum, the clock tick, the house breathe. My grief didn't come as tears. It came as clarity, a clean slice through fog. Because here is the truth Ivy had forgotten. I wasn't just her mother. I was the reason their dream was standing at all. I had quietly funded more than the wedding deposits. I had covered their temporary shortfalls. I had backed their lifestyle with steady, careful generosity, the way you prop up a leaning fence because you love the garden behind it and the Weatherbees. Oh, I'd noticed things. Little inconsistencies, Lucinda's obsession with appearances, Grant's smooth assurances that everything's fine, the way they talked about money like it was a costume you put on and not a reality you lived in. So that night, I did what I always did when a story didn't add up. I investigated, not dramatically, not with spies or hacking, with phone calls, old contacts, and a mind that didn't fall for glitter. A former colleague, Elias, still worked in risk analysis. When I asked him gently about the Weatherby family holdings, he went quiet in a way that told me I'd stepped on a nerve. "Marjorie," he said, low, "why are you asking?" "My daughter's marrying into the family," I replied, "and I'm concerned." He exhaled slowly. "It's bad. Their name still opens doors, but behind the doors, they're bleeding. They've been propping up a failing portfolio with refinancing and favors. There's a lien on one of their properties. There are lawsuits they've kept quiet. They're not the dynasty they look like." I sat down at my kitchen table because my knees suddenly didn't trust themselves. "Are they broke?" I asked. "They're desperate," Elias said, and in my world that was worse. Desperate people do dangerous things, especially when pride is involved. The pieces slid into place with a horrible elegance. The housewarming wasn't just a party, it was a performance meant to lure confidence, a stage to convince their circle that the Weatherbys were still thriving, that Grant and Ivy were the new polished face of stability, and my presence, my plainness, my reality threatened the illusion, but also my presence threatened something else. If I showed up, I might notice, I might ask questions, I might recognize desperation dressed up as tradition. I wasn't an embarrassment, I was a liability. I was the one person in that entire arrangement who understood leverage, and they couldn't afford for me to see the strings. So, on the morning of the housewarming, I played my part beautifully. I wore a simple sweater and brushed my hair and answered Ivy's quick, "Happy housewarming week, Mom," text with a little heart emoji, like a woman who'd been pacified. I even made her favorite lemon loaf and left it on her porch the day before, wrapped in foil like a peace offering. Because sometimes the most effective move is to let people believe they've won. Then Monday morning, I went to my bank. I walked in wearing my best coat, the one Dennis used to call my "don't mess with me" coat. I didn't go to a teller. I asked for the branch manager, a woman who'd known me for years. I sat in her office, placed my folder on the desk, and spoke in the calm tone I used to use when a client's numbers were lying to their face. "I need to place an administrative hold on a joint account," I said. She blinked. "Is everything all right, Marjorie?" "No," I said simply. "It isn't." The account in question wasn't just a wedding fund. It was a carefully structured shared account I'd opened when Ivy was younger, meant to help her transition into adult stability. My name was still on it, not because I wanted control, because I wanted protection. And the clause was clear. Significant withdrawals required both signatures. Ivy, in her hurry to build a life that looked expensive, had been draining it in increments, small enough not to trigger the clause, but the big payments were coming. The final vendor balances, the venue, the catering, the designer details that made the Weatherbees look untouchable. I asked the manager to freeze it, fully, immediately. No online access, no transfers, no withdrawals, not without both of us present. The manager reviewed the paperwork, nodded slowly, and slid the authorization form toward me. "You're within your rights," she said. "I know," I replied, and signed my name with a hand that did not shake. When I walked out of that bank, I didn't feel triumphant like a villain. I felt steady, like I'd finally set down a heavy box I'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. Then I went home and made tea. I waited. The first call came that afternoon. Ivy. Her voice was bright, too bright, the way it gets when panic is trying to pretend it's a minor inconvenience. "Mom, did you talk to the bank? Something's wrong with the account." I let it go to voicemail. Then Grant called. His voice was no longer charming. It had an edge. "Marjorie, we need to resolve this immediately. There are payments due." I let it go to voicemail, too. By evening, Ivy was crying into the phone. I could hear it in the way her words stumbled. "Mom, please, the florist is threatening to cancel. Lucinda is furious. This is humiliating." Humiliating. The word came back around like a boomerang and hit her right in the mouth. The next day they showed up at my house, not like guests, like creditors. Ivy looked like she hadn't slept. Her makeup couldn't hide the swelling around her eyes. Grant's jaw was tight, his posture stiff with anger that wanted to be authority. "What did you do?" Ivy demanded. I set my teacup down slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch. I let the silence stretch until they felt it. "I protected myself," I said. Grant scoffed. "Protected yourself from what? It's Ivy's money. It's for the wedding." I looked at him the way I used to look at clients who thought a loan was free because the bank smiled while handing it over. "No," I said, calm as winter. "It's my money. It was my gift, and gifts require respect." Ivy's mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You're upset about the housewarming, okay? I'm sorry, but you still want the money," I finished for her. Her face twisted. "That's not fair." I stood, and my knees held me just fine. "You didn't uninvite me to spare my feelings," I said softly. "You uninvited me to protect your image." "I protected myself," I said. Grant scoffed. "Protected yourself from what? It's Ivy's money. It's for the wedding." I looked at him the way I used to look at clients who thought a loan was free because the bank smiled while handing it over. "No," I said, calm as winter. "It's my money. It was my gift, and gifts require respect." Ivy's mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You're upset about the housewarming. Okay, I'm sorry, but you still want the money," I finished for her. Her face twisted. "That's not fair." I stood, and my knees held me just fine. "You didn't uninvite me to spare my feelings," I said softly. "You uninvited me to protect your image, and you did it on purpose, with rehearsed kindness, like you were putting a blanket over a cage." Ivy's eyes darted away. She couldn't look at me. That was the clearest truth in the room. Grant stepped forward, voice hard. "Marjorie, you're jeopardizing everything." "My parents." "Your parents," I interrupted, and my voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "Your parents are not my concern. My daughter is my concern, and my daughter has been traded like a ticket into a world that is eating her alive." His nostrils flared. "You don't know what you're talking about." I smiled then, not wide, not cruel, just knowing. "I do," I said. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Ivy's voice cracked. "Mom, please, just unfreeze it. I'll invite you. You can come. We'll fix it." I stared at her for a long moment, not with hatred, not even with anger anymore, with grief, with the quiet sadness of realizing your child is willing to buy you back only when you become expensive to lose. "No," I said, "I'm not for sale." Her face crumpled. "Then what do you want?" And there it was, the negotiation, the moment she expected me to name a price. "I want you to come back to yourself," I said. Grant laughed, short and cold. "That's not a real answer." "It's the only one that matters," I replied. I went to my desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder, neat, labeled, the way my life always was. I placed it on the table between us. "This is what happens next," I said. "Half of what remains in that account will be moved into a protected trust for my care. A trust you will not touch. The other half will be used for your wedding only under a budget I approve line by line. No more performances, no more entrants. A wedding that fits a real life." Grant's eyes widened. "You can't—" "I already did," I said. Ivy's breath hitched. "Mom." "You wanted me out of your world," I said gently. "Now you're going to learn what it costs to erase the hand that feeds you." They left that day without shouting, not because they weren't angry, because anger doesn't work on a locked door. The housewarming happened without me. Of course it did. They posed, they smiled, they made sure the right people held the right glasses in the right rooms. But something had shifted. The money wasn't flowing the same. The illusion had hairline cracks, and once cracks appear, people like Lucinda can smell them. Over the next months, Ivy called more softly, less demanding, more human. She started asking questions she hadn't asked in years, real questions. "Mom, how do I know if something is a good decision? How do I know if I'm being managed?" The first time she said that word, managed, I felt something in my chest loosen, just slightly, like a knot, finally admitting it was tired. I didn't forgive her quickly. I didn't sweep it under a rug with holiday bows. I taught her, slowly, patiently, the way I used to teach frightened young nurses how to hold steady hands in emergencies. I made her sit with numbers. I made her read contracts. I made her understand what desperation looks like when it's wearing pearls. And one evening, late fall, the kind of night that smells like rain and endings, she came to my house alone. No Grant, no polished smile. She sat at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug, and whispered, "Mom, I think I've been trying to buy belonging." I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine, old skin over young skin, and said, "It's an expensive habit, but you can quit." What happened to the wedding? It changed, not overnight, not neatly. There were fights, there were tears, there were sharp conversations behind closed doors. The Weatherbys didn't like losing control. Grant didn't like the sudden presence of boundaries. But boundaries have a way of revealing character the way fire reveals metal. In the end, the wedding that happened was smaller, not as glittering, not as performative, realer. The kind of gathering where you can hear people laugh without checking if it's the right kind of laugh. At the reception, Ivy found me and held my face in both hands the way she used to when she was little and sick with fever. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I was ashamed of the wrong things. I believed her, not because her words were perfect, because her eyes were. And now, when I hear the word housewarming, I think of it differently. I think of how a home is not warmed by chandeliers or expensive wine. A home is warmed by truth, by respect, by the quiet safety of knowing you don't have to audition to belong. Sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is stop paying for the version of you that's trying to impress strangers. Sometimes you have to let the lights flicker, let the music cut out, let the illusion stumble, so the real person inside your child can finally sit down and breathe. In the nursing home where I visit my older sister now, the halls smell like soap and soft resignation. I watch women with trembling hands folding napkins as if it still matters how corners meet. I watch them stare out windows, remembering rooms they once owned, remembering tables where they once sat at the head. And I think about how easily the world tries to move women from the head of the table to the corner. How easily even our children can learn to treat our love like a utility, something that should work quietly in the background, unnoticed, unpaid. But love isn't electricity. It's not meant to be taken for granted. Love is a living thing. It needs honor. It needs boundaries. It needs gratitude, the way a home needs heat. I don't know what will happen to Ivy and Grant in the long run. I'm old enough to know weddings don't guarantee character, but I know this. My daughter learned that day that embarrassment isn't wearing sensible shoes to a fancy event. Embarrassment is selling your soul for approval and calling it growth. And as for me, my quiet little house is still here. The kettle still sings. The light still falls across my kitchen floor in the late afternoon, warm and plain and honest. Sometimes Ivy comes by and sits with me without her phone in her hand. Sometimes we say nothing. Sometimes we laugh about something small and stupid, the kind of laugh that doesn't need witnesses. And when she leaves, she hugs me like she's hugging a person again. Not a problem. That's my housewarming lesson. Not about a new house, about an old heart, about what happens when you finally stop letting people decorate their life with your dignity and call it love. The world can keep its performances. I'll keep my peace, and I'll keep my keys.